their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
I do not have sexual relations.
An absolutely perfect phone call.
Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat on ABC News and ABC News Radio. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz Chidello.
What a week, Chaz.
Oh, what a day.
The focus has been on the silver state of Nevada.
Yeah.
And it is Nevada, not Nevada, as we've been saying all our lives, Nevada. With the debate yesterday, the caucuses this weekend, and they've effectively been also running a primary with 4 days of early voting over the course of last weekend. So there's a big question of, is this going to be another Iowa-like caucus schmozzle? And are we going to get a surprise? Is it going to be Bernie Sanders, as the polls suggest?
And can I say, on the schmozzle potential, this actually has more potential of a schmozzle because with the early voting, people, it's like a preferential system where people are voting 1, 2, 3. And if their particular delegate doesn't get 15%, they then go to the second one.
In a particular precinct. So you have to file it to your precinct caucus.
So what that means is if they screw it up and they get the early votes wrong with the technology, there are
everything
going to
goes
there'll be caucus people waiting to find out what to do on the night. They might be waiting for a week.
Yeah. and the other big thing about the Nevada caucuses, unlike the Iowa caucuses, which are typically held in school gymnasiums, you're amongst your neighbours, often in Nevada, because they hold them at lunchtime on a Saturday, you've got people who are caucusing in the casino in which they work. And one of the big things of that, and one of the big concerns about, as well as caucuses being generally anti-democratic, is that you're there with your work colleagues, including potentially your boss. And if your boss is a member of, let's say, the Culinary Workers Union, who has said Bernie Sanders is a bad dude, and you're thinking, well, I quite would like to caucus for Bernie, but my boss is there and he really doesn't like Bernie, it can become very, very awkward. So then people go, oh, I might caucus at the casino down the road instead. So nobody's really sure how many people are going to turn up at what particular caucus site. So it could all go horribly wrong.
It certainly could. And as you say, there's been a lot of early voting. It's like its own primary. Yep. There's been, 3/4 of the votes from 2016 have already been cast.
75,000 early votes.
That's
and
right.
they're maybe only going to get 120,000 all up once the caucusing takes place.
And it was all before the debate. So say if you're Elizabeth Warren, you had a good debate, and you were polling at 6 or 7% beforehand, you're screwed.
Well, unless you get an overwhelming surge of support. But yes, let's talk about the debate, because what a debate it was. Strangely enough, of course, we had Mike Bloomberg, who is not on the ballot in Nevada, making his first appearance at the expense of the other billionaire in the race, Tom Steyer, who missed out on qualifying for the Nevada debate, even though he's been polling around 10% in Nevada and South Carolina as well. So that was weird, but Bloomberg himself, there was so much anticipation after spending $400 million plus on advertising. Finally, he was going to be there with some rivals up against him. Overall, did he have a good night, Chaz?
No, he did not, John. Not even slightly.
Yeah, it's hard to, if you haven't seen the whole debate, it was only a 2-hour debate.
Yeah.
And of all, this is the 9th Democratic candidate debate in this primary process back to June last year. This was the most extraordinary, the most watchable, the most shove your face full of popcorn debate. This was unlike a lot of those debates, entirely forgettable. This was completely memorable.
Oh, yeah, because you had, 3 or 4 candidates on their last chance, essentially, before potentially dropping out. One of them being Warren, who is known as a speaker when she wants to, who's been trying to be rising above it all, being Miss Unity. She decided to throw in.
Yeah, have a look at this. And this is, to set this up, this is in the first 5 minutes of the debate. And Elizabeth Warren has, in the last minute or so of Mike Bloomberg giving an answer, she's been there going, oh, pick me, pick me, pick me, pick me. So that's the context of this, because this wasn't a crime of passion. This was a calculated political assassination. And this moment, this minute or so, I think it's going to go down in history alongside Lloyd Benson's You're No Jack Kennedy moment. This is an astonishing rip. Have a look.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg. Democrats are not going to win if we have a nominee who has a history of hiding his tax returns, of harassing women, and of supporting racist policies like redlining and stop and frisk. Look, I'll support whoever the Democratic nominee is, but understand this. Democrats take a huge risk if we just substitute one arrogant billionaire for another.
And there it was, possibly the most perfect 1 minute and 15 seconds ever delivered by a Democratic presidential candidate in a debate. She hit every point. She got it word perfect. And now horse-faced lesbian is probably going to be a phrase that everyone has now heard about Mike Bloomberg. He used that language. It plants the idea incredibly firmly. He is no better than Donald Trump. Is this who we want to nominate to take on Donald Trump?
And it helped her as well that Bloomberg was in shock the entire time.
Yep.
He's trying to be calm. He comes off like a cross between a block of wood and someone who's asleep. But still, even though he was doing this, he was still swaying with every hit. Just, oh.
Yep.
And I think you could see him feeling it.
Yeah, and clearly, and we'll see, there are a few other very, very sort of surgical incisions made into Mike Bloomberg that did beg the question of, now, there's not a lot when somebody has a minute 15 to talk and they're just going to let you have it. There's not a lot you can do to rebut that, but these were attacks that were signalled weeks in advance. We have known what was coming. Bloomberg has known what was coming. And the fact that he was just standing there and unable, it seems, to counter some of the obvious questions. Let's have a look at the more substantive attack which came in the next few minutes, which was essentially about the reports that we've been reading for the last couple of weeks about the number of women who complained about Mike Bloomberg's behaviour as their boss in the 1980s and 90s, that he had a very misogynistic culture in the Bloomberg Corporation, that women who worked for him were often the subject of those horse-faced lesbian-style attacks, etc. And the fact that he settled a lot of these cases, we don't know how many, with non-disclosure agreements. And so the push has been to say, well, free them from this and let's find out exactly how they felt about it. Take a look.
The mayor has to stand on his record, and what we need to know is exactly what's lurking out there. He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is that?
Let me finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told. And let me put, Senator, the company and somebody else, in this case, a man or a woman, or could be more than that, they decided when they made an agreement that they wanted to keep it quiet for everybody's interest. They signed the agreements, and that's what we're going to live with.
I'm sorry. No, the question is, are the women bound by being muzzled by you? And you could release them from that immediately.
It's easy. All the mayor has to do is say, you are released from the non-disclosure agreement, period.
So Joe Biden piling on at the end there, but it was really Elizabeth Warren that pinned him to the mat and kept him there, and he had no good answer for it.
Well, he had to self-own by saying, oh, it was just a joke that I told.
Right.
I mean, that,
and we heard the crowd there.
Yeah, that was terrible. Like he just walked straight into that. Yeah. I also felt that something which we didn't show, but Warren did quite cleverly, was to connect it to his electability and say with the drip of how many more of these cases, how can you run against Trump? Yep. Which I thought was clever as well.
To which the honest answer from him would be, don't worry about Elizabeth, I've signed a lot of these non-disclosure agreements and I am enforcing them. They're never coming out. I've got $63 billion. They know I will destroy them.
What was funny though, for me, was the spin from his team, who were sort of tweeting during all this stuff. And there was a great tweet where they said, it took him just 45 5 minutes in his first debate in 10 years to get his legs on stage. He was just warming up tonight.
It reminded me of both Barack Obama's first debate against Mitt Romney in 2012, when after 4 years as President of the United States, 4 years since he'd run in a primary himself, 4 years since anybody had disagreed with him to his face, he's President of the United States. Obama lost that debate terribly to Mitt Romney in October of 2012. Similarly, back in 1984, Ronald Reagan, terrible against Walter Mondale in the first debate of that general election. Incumbent presidents are really bad because nobody stands up to them. They're out of debate practice. Mike Bloomberg, clearly 10 years out of office, and even going back and looking at his debates in 2001 against Mark Green, the Democrat that he beat for New York mayor, he wasn't a good debater then, even when he was match fit. And Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden and the rest of them had 8 debates to get ready for this moment. And he looked like a retiree wandering into the middle of a boxing ring.
And that is true. And it also didn't do him any favours that the moderators weren't giving him many chances to respond. He basically got one chance to respond for every 7 attacks launched at him, essentially. But having said that, he knew it was coming. You said this before. He's got the best team money can buy. He should have been prepared, especially on that topic, because Elizabeth Warren has actually criticised Bloomberg already in public a number of times about those non-disclosure agreements. In fact, in the lead-up to the debate, she was saying they were a way for people to hide bad things they've done. And Bloomberg even responded with this piping hot comeback, maybe the Santa should worry about herself and I'll worry about myself. It looks like he didn't worry about himself enough to me, John.
Yeah.
I mean, Warren even made it clear she was coming for him the day before the debate, tweeting, "At least now primary voters curious about how each candidate will take on Donald Trump can get a live demonstration of how we each take on an egomaniac billionaire." So he knew it was coming. He should have been prepared. He was too arrogant, in my view. I mean, the stuff that he prepared was really weak tea. Like him going through, all the women in my company are very happy. I've 70% of my philanthropy is women, and then and Warren just pierced that with one sentence. Listen to what he just said. He's treated some women well.
Yeah, it was pretty terrible. And his own way of representing his wealth and his philanthropy and everything else, there was an unlikability, a mean-spiritedness about a guy. He's given away $10 billion. He's got a great story to tell. He could have played the Tom Steyer card of essentially saying, yeah, I've made a fortune under this system and rich people like me are not taxed nearly enough, which is why I've given away 13% of my income on top of what I'm required to as a taxpayer, because rich people like me should be paying more. I admit that the system is not right, which is why I'm trying to change the system as well as, making a difference myself. He has a good argument there that says, that he has a rationale for being on that stage amongst Democrats. He didn't use it. He simply got shirty, prickly, and sort of, I make no apologies for making lots of money.
Having said that, he's going to now throw another $100 million at it in the next 2 weeks.
Right.
And he's got one more debate to get it right before Super Tuesday, so we'll see where that goes. I'd like to focus a little bit more on Elizabeth Warren because, like I said, this could be her last chance, and she did her best. It wasn't just against Bloomberg that she was swinging. As I said, she completely got rid of the happy warrior thing, and she was just attacking everyone. Like she was just strafing at one point in time, which is talking about Medicare for all. She's brought it out of nowhere and just took out everyone. Have a look at this.
But we need to get everybody's health care plan out here. Mayor Buttigieg really has a slogan that was thought up by his consultants to paper over a thin version of a plan that would leave millions of people unable to afford their health care. It's not a plan, it's a PowerPoint. And Amy's plan is even less. It's like a Post-it note, insert plan here. Bernie has started very much has a good start, but instead of expanding and bringing in more people to help, instead his campaign relentlessly attacks everyone who asks a question or tries to fill in details about how to actually make this work. And then his own advisors say, probably won't happen anyway.
Sanders did not like that at all.
No.
So the question is is it too little too late?
Well, this was a bit reminiscent of when Marco Rubio finally took the gloves off against Donald Trump in the Republican primaries 4 years ago and started talking about hand size and so on. Except that Elizabeth Warren is attacking on the substance. She wasn't going personal. Clearly from Klobuchar's response, I mean, she was incredulous. And I think it ruffled Klobuchar a bit because she and Elizabeth Warren have had a bit of a non-aggression pact going between the two of them, even though they're ideologically reasonably distinct. There has been a bit of a sisterhood going. They've been attending some events together in Nevada, not where they're doing campaign events, but where they're visiting certain groups and so on. So she was clearly hurt by the suggestion that her policies, were written on a post-it note. Pete didn't like it either, but for her to then pivot and start criticising Bernie.
That's new.
Really interesting, particularly in Nevada, of course, where you've got some of the big unions, the culinary workers union, saying, we've actually got some really great health plans for our members and we don't want to see them taken away by some government takeover that Bernie's proposing.
Yeah. I should also say as well that something which I noticed, first the tweet that she did beforehand where she explicitly said, let's see how someone can attack someone like Trump. And then I got the feeling that she was really trying to make Bloomberg her stand-in for Trump, to say to people, you want someone who can take on Trump?
Yep.
Look at me, I can take on Trump. Yep. And so I think that was what she was trying to sell. I don't know if it'll cut through. I mean, because especially given what I said before, with the early voting, most of the voting's already been done.
But there are a lot of polls where she's coming second or third in Nevada.
California's going to be important. So
California's going to be very important. Yeah. But if we look at the next couple of weeks, if she can come second or third in Nevada, if Joe Biden picks up a little bit of ground, even though Bloomberg's not on the ballot here, it seems that other moderates like Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg may have peaked after New Hampshire, that Klobuchar didn't have a great debate this week, certainly not as good as her New Hampshire debate. So there are a number of moving pieces here, and we don't know where necessarily support from one candidate is going to shift to another. But Elizabeth Warren is certainly positioning herself as somewhere in that sort of middle lane within the sort of leftward trajectory of the Democratic Party at the moment.
If it becomes a civil war between Bloomberg and Sanders, which some people, maybe they change their mind now, but before this debate, some people thought was going to happen.
Yep.
She could be an in-between there. I was just going to say, let's talk about the front runner, Sanders, who got a little bit of attack from Warren, but I mean, people are focusing on Bloomberg more than him. And Bloomberg and Sanders had a few stoushes themselves, actually. Here's an example.
I want workers to be able to sit on corporate boards as well, so they can have some say over what happens to their lives.
Mayor Bloomberg, you own a large company. Would you support what Senator Sanders is proposing?
Absolutely not. I can't think of ways that would make it easier for Donald Trump to get reelected than listening to this conversation. It's ridiculous. We're not going to throw out capitalism. We tried that. Other countries tried that. It was called communism, and it just didn't work.
It was noteworthy to me, by the way, before Bloomberg mentioned communism, that Sanders was actually enjoying that. He was enjoying Bloomberg going here.
A number of times Bernie was smiling in anticipation of attacks. And I'm not sure whether that was because Bernie is now the front runner. He can see the delegate math lying out in Super Tuesday states and beyond, and he is now undoubtedly the front runner for this nomination. But I also wonder whether Bernie has sort of got some internal polling that says, Senator, they still think you're a cranky old man. You should smile some more, because he was smiling a lot at things that were not necessarily stuff that you would smile at. But that kind of we tried communism, it didn't work thing. Yeah, I mean, clearly that is going to be, if Sanders is the nominee, that is going to be the line of attack on Bernie Sanders come November. In fact, we saw Donald Trump quoting Mike Bloomberg, attacking Bloomberg's pretty ordinary performance, but also, by extension, attacking Bernie Sanders. This is what the president had to say.
Quote, I don't think there's any chance whatsoever of Senator Sanders defeating President Trump. Mini Mike Bloomberg. Mini! There's even less chance, especially after watching your debate performance last night of you winning the Democratic nomination. But I hope you do.
And of course, after every one of these Democratic debates, some wag on Twitter says that the real winner tonight was Donald Trump. I actually had a feeling for the first time Donald Trump was the real winner after that, because for a lot of Democrats, they're looking at this field now and they're saying Bernie's too left, Bloomberg's too Republican, Joe's too old, nobody else is taking off. They seem to have a problem right now.
I reckon as well there is an issue which they talked about a little bit on the stage, but I think Donald Trump, even with his absurd medical certificate, has to be licking his lips about the Bernie health issue. And I felt like the Democrats let Sanders off the hook a bit. Buttigieg tried to take him on a bit on that, but to me that is a weeping sore. If he does become the nominee, the fact that he has, like, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist about this, but the fact that he said, I am going to release my medical records.
Yep.
Because it's the right thing to do, quote.
Yes.
Then he gets a heart attack,
Yep.
and then he says, I don't need to release my medical records. I've released this letter.
Yes.
And now, let me say, those letters that he's released, there's nothing wrong with those letters.
Yep.
They're good letters, but the point is
and they appear to have actually been written by the doctors rather than dictated by the candidate.
That's right.
Refreshing.
That's right. He may well have no health issues at all, but just the fact that he is stubbornly refusing to do the very thing that he said he was going to do makes it seem suspicious.
Right, and you can only guess at the fact that the reason why he doesn't want his full medical records after the heart attack last October to come out is because he's now using words like heart attack, which is interesting, because for a long time it was all about, I had a stent installed, I had a health issue, etc. Wouldn't use the heart attack phrase. He did say heart attack during this debate, which was interesting, but he's still not revealing, does it say you have lost this, damage to the heart muscle can very easily happen as a result of a heart attack. We don't know the extent to which that is the case. How advanced is the heart disease that he is suffering? These are the kinds of things which some will say, just judge him on his policies. Others will counter and say, he is 78 years old. He is 8 years older than the oldest ever first-term president. He is the age at which the average American man dies. 78. He's standing for a job that is a 4-year term. He had a heart attack while campaigning for this job, and yet it's okay that he just puts out a letter from a doctor.
And yes, it would be hypocritical for Trump to attack him.
Yeah.
We know he's going to.
Of course.
and so.
Or he'll just remind people of it, and he'll come up with a new nickname for Bernie, which is about the fact that, don't have a heart attack, Bernie.
Yeah. That's right. And so, as I said, but Buttigieg did attack him a little bit on it, but only a little bit. And it was really just to set up a different attack.
I'm actually less concerned about the lack of transparency on Sanders' personal health than I am about the lack of transparency on how to pay for his health care plan, since he said that it's impossible to even know how much it's going to cost. And even after raising taxes on everybody making $29,000, there is still a multi-trillion-dollar hole. Matter of fact, if you add up his policies altogether, they come to $50 trillion. He's only explained $25 trillion worth of revenue, which means that the hole in there is bigger than the size of the entire economy of the United States.
As far as an attack goes, as far as an attack goes, that's a fine attack, but it's letting him completely off the hook on the medical records, which I found strange.
Yeah, it was, and I can only imagine that he thinks that the only way for Pete Buttigieg to win over supporters from Bernie Sanders, or at least from other moderates, if not Bernie Sanders, is not to make age too much of an issue. Just let people make their own decisions about that. Because otherwise, to go into some kind of, abacus argument about $1 trillion here and there, or 25 trillion bigger than the economy, whatever, over people's head. They can understand a 78-year-old who had a heart attack, and if people have got an issue with that, maybe he should be focusing on that. But yeah, interesting choice from him. Yeah,
one more thing with Sanders, which didn't get much coverage, and I should say I thought Sanders had a pretty good night in that people didn't attack him that much, and he seemed quite jolly, as you said. He seemed to be enjoying himself, so I thought he had a pretty good night.
Yeah, the great unstated was kind of, you think I'm bad? Look at this billionaire next to me.
That's right.
Kind of like, who is the Democrat now?
Yes, but the one thing which he did, which I thought was a bit strange, which people didn't comment much on, was when they were talking about the colouring union and some of Bernie's supporters and how they'd sent some abusive messages to the colouring union. By the way, it wasn't just Bernie supporters. There were other people as well who sent abusive texts. Bernie appeared to, he put in qualifiers, but he appeared to be insinuating that Russia might be involved.
Let me say something else about this, not being too paranoid. All of us remember 2016. And what we remember is efforts by Russians and others to try to interfere in our election and divide us up. I'm not saying that's happening, but it would not shock me. I saw some of those tweets regarding the Culinary Workers Union. I have a 30-year, 100% pro-union voting record. Do you think I would support, or anybody supports me, would be attacking union leaders? It's not thinkable.
Okay, now he didn't go too far. He sort of held himself back from the brink.
Planted the seed.
But that was definitely encouraging conspiracy theorising. Wasn't very impressed with that, I have to say. But
although
you get pinged for it.
And in the 24 hours after that debate, though, reports in the New York Times earlier today have talked about how the acting Director of National Intelligence, Joe Maguire, went to members of Congress last week to say Russia's interfering with the election again, which is why Trump has removed him and is putting Rick Grinnell in as acting Director of National Intelligence. So maybe Bernie had gotten a bit of forewarning of that. It wouldn't be unlikely that one of his House allies would have told him about that. So that was an odd thing. We do know, though, that the Internet Research Agency that was getting involved in 2016 was putting Bernie bots out there as well. That was a part of the Mueller report's findings. So maybe it's not that far-fetched. Now, it almost felt as though Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg were kind of just no longer a part of the main game. And I'm not sure why that was. Maybe it was because Bloomberg's there, and it feels like it could be a Bernie Bloomberg, maybe Warren and Biden as the sort of coming up through the middle now, and that we don't need these other two. But still, it was almost like we had this almost sibling-like squabble going on between Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg. No love lost between these two Midwestern moderates. They seem to genuinely dislike each other. And it all started, of course, with the little gaffe that Klobuchar came up with, we talked about on Planet America on Wednesday night, where Klobuchar couldn't remember the name of the Mexican president. And Pete sort of piled on after the moderator gave Klobuchar a hard time, and Amy really resented it. Take a look.
Senator Klobuchar, my colleague specifically asked you if you could name the president of Mexico, and your response was no.
Yes, that's right. And I said that I made an error. I think having a president that maybe is humble and is able to admit that here and there maybe wouldn't be a bad thing.
Mayor Buttigieg,
if you could let me...
a good response?
You're staking your candidacy on your Washington experience. You're on the committee that oversees border security. You're on the committee that does trade. You're literally in part of the committee that's overseeing these things. And we're not able to speak to literally the first thing about the politics of the country to ourselves.
Are you trying to say that I'm dumb, or are you mocking me here, Pete?
I'm saying that you shouldn't trivialize that
I made
knowledge.
An error. People sometimes forget names.
Wow. That was very, very testy. And afterwards, after the end of the debate, Klobuchar basically blanked Buttigieg, ducked around behind him rather than shaking his hand afterwards. No love lost there. But do you think either of them scored points in that, or is this kind of mutually assured destruction? You both look kind of petty.
Yeah, I think you're right what you said before. They don't seem like they're part of the main game anymore. And
remarkable, given that Pete Buttigieg is technically the delegate leader right now.
Yeah, but I don't think anyone seriously believes that he's going to be challenging these people in a few weeks' time. I know maybe that's just what I'm thinking, but it seems to me that people aren't treating them like they're serious contenders, either one of them. And I don't think it worked well for them, that's for sure. I do actually feel a bit sorry for Klobuchar, though, in that I felt like she got a terrible time from the moderators generally. In fact, I thought the moderators overall were awful. I thought they gave people minutes to attack each other, but only seconds to defend the attacks. And often they didn't let people defend themselves against the attacks at all. And they seem to be really trying to encourage squabbling and trying to remove any attempt at substance whatsoever in this debate, which was entertaining. Yeah. But in particular, that moderator who was part of that section, which was Vanessa Oak, she was incredibly unfair to Klobuchar in my view. First of all, that little bit that you just played then, let me just show you what happened a couple of seconds later. Let's have a look at this.
Are you trying to say that I'm dumb, or are you mocking me here, Pete?
I'm saying that you shouldn't trivialize
I made an error. People sometimes forget names. I am the one that has, number one, has the experience based on passing over 100 bills.
I'm not sure if you counted then. 15 seconds she got to respond to that attack.
Yeah.
15 seconds before she was interrupted by that moderator, who, by the way, not just brought up this, I thought, kind of inane question about the Mexican president anyway, but you expect them to ask that.
Sure.
Then did a follow-up, then did another one, and then did this.
But let's just be clear. Missing a name all by itself does not indicate that you do not understand what's going on. And I just think this is unfair.
Senator Warren, you're right. Senator Warren, you're right, but Senator Klobuchar could not discuss Mexican policy.
Fair enough.
I'm the only one who knows this man and met with him.
I do have to respond. Oh,
Come on, man.
This
I called
is
him
really,
up.
you have just invoked my name again.
Okay, what was that? If she wants to be part of the debate, she should run for president.
Yeah, well, and it was weird because earlier in the debate we had essentially Elizabeth Warren being the moderator, pressing Bloomberg on the NDAs. Then we had the moderator later on becoming like a candidate attacking Klobuchar.
Yeah.
It was very muddled, but there were 5 moderators, and I don't know whether the amount of free-flowing argument between the various candidates put their schedule out. They were kind of uptight because they only had 2 hours to finish this whole debate in. But, you know, we had John Ralston from the Nevada Independent. He basically asked one question about climate change, one follow-up to try and make it more about Nevada, and then that was it for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And they're the co-host of a debate which is meant to be helping Nevada voters decide who to vote for.
Sure. But anyway, I do feel whatever the reasons, Klobuchar, she stood no chance beforehand, but if she had 0.1% of a chance, she got destroyed by that debate. So I did feel sorry for her.
Yeah, before we move on, one final clip, because the big question, of course, now is with proportional allocation of delegates out of Super Tuesday and beyond, the question is, are we going to rely on the nominee getting 1,991 delegates to have a majority of the delegates for them to become the nominee, or are we going to be faced with a brokered convention? Should the person who is just the front runner, if they've got 1,500 delegates, should they get the nomination? Should the super delegates get behind them, etc.? Not surprisingly, Bernie Sanders is the only one who thinks that if you've got a plurality rather than a majority, you should be the nominee automatically. This is how it played out when they did the lightning round on stage.
Whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do,
I'm trying to do
so
this
that
yes or no to make
everybody
it
else,
fast.
everybody can.
So you want the convention to work its will?
Yes.
Senator Warren.
But a convention working its will means that people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until
Should the leading
you come
person
to the convention. All of the people.
All righty. Vice President Biden?
Play by the rules.
Yes or no? Leading person with the delegates, should they be the nominee or not?
No, let the process work its way out.
Mayor Buttigieg?
Not necessarily, not till there's a
Senator
majority.
Klobuchar?
Let the process work.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the process includes 500 super delegates on the second ballot. So I think that the will of the people should prevail. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Most votes should become the nominee.
Now, my takeaway from that is that every other candidate has given up winning the most delegates.
Yeah.
They've basically conceded Bernie Sanders is going to win the most delegates. Now, for those who are, especially Sanders supporters, who are getting outraged, going, oh, they're trying to steal it from Bernie again, I do want to remind you of 2016, when Bernie Sanders was getting flogged by Hillary Clinton in both delegates and votes. He had a different view back then about what should happen as far as people winning the most delegates and votes won. Back then, the Sanders campaign said, the Democrats should consider backing him even if he doesn't win the majority of pledged delegates. He said that super delegates are going to have to ask themselves, do they want the second strongest candidate running against Trump or the strongest candidate? So obviously, these ethics are situational, as always the case with politicians. I'm not blaming Sanders. I'm just saying, let's keep this in perspective. And by the way, those people conceding, they're not the only ones conceding. 538 have put out an average of projected delegates for just after Super Tuesday, if polling holds up as is at the moment.
Which means less than 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, it's close. Sanders, 608 delegates. Bloomberg, 273 delegates. Biden, 270. Buttigieg, 157. Warren, 127. Okay, that might not pan out.
Yeah.
But we're talking over a 300 delegate lead there. If that pans out like that, Sanders is home. Yeah. That is insurmountable with proportional delegates in the Democrat system. So I just want to flag that.
Yes, but of course we don't yet know what impact Mike Bloomberg's train wreck of a debate performance is going to have on those polls. If you look at the average of national polls this week, Bloomberg is very, very competitive, and a lot of that has come from Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders is 10 points in front of Joe Biden, 28 points to 18. Then Bloomberg on 16, Warren 12, Buttigieg 10, and down it goes from there. If Mike Bloomberg does not lose 6 or 7 points after that debate performance, I think we've answered the perennial question of do these debates have a big impact, and can money buy you points in opinion polls? Because if another $100 million can stop Bloomberg absolutely cratering after that performance, and admittedly he's got another debate next week in South Carolina where he may find his sea legs, but if that doesn't have a big impact in the next week or so, it will certainly tell us something. But let's hear some more now from Judge Shira Scheindlin, who we had on Wednesday night's Planet America. We spoke to her at some length about Mike Bloomberg's stop and frisk policy when he was mayor of New York in the early 2000s. She was the judge, of course, who famously ruled that practice was unconstitutional. It's a great conversation. You'll find it on iView and Facebook now if you want to check out that portion of it. But there was a lot more to discuss with Shira Scheindlin. She was among more than 2,000 former federal prosecutors this week who signed a letter calling for the resignation of Attorney General Bill Barr over the interference in the sentencing of Roger Stone last week. Interestingly, Roger Stone was sentenced to just over 3 years prison earlier today, our time, which is at the lower end of what he was facing, which was potentially 7 to 9 years. But we wanted to talk to Shira about not just that case, but also the effect of the Trump administration on the American judiciary. Here she is, Judge Shira Scheindlin.
Leaving aside the particulars of the Roger Stone case, though, in general, if an Attorney General feels that a prosecutor is being overzealous, isn't it a good thing for the Attorney General to step in?
I must tell you 99.5% that prosecution letter is within the guidelines range. So I don't know how anybody could call it overzealous. It just happens the range is high in the Stone case. But if it's true that a prosecutor is really overzealous, it should go up the ranks before the letter comes in. So the line prosecutor drafts the letter, it goes to the U.S. attorney in that district, well, probably first to the chief of the bureau in that office, and then to the U.S. attorney. And the U.S. attorney, which in this case was the D.C. U.S. attorney, signs off on it. If that person is worried, then yes, it would go to Main Justice, and it might find its way to the Attorney General, but that has to be extremely rare. I would think it would only get to the Attorney General if it's the highest profile case imaginable.
Judge, last week Attorney General Barr said that in an interview that he can't keep doing his job if the President keeps tweeting about Department of Justice cases. In a tweet in response to that, the President said, actually, I'm perfectly well within my rights to express an opinion on Department of Justice cases. Is he correct? Does he have that right?
Yes. I mean, I'd have to say that like any other citizen of the United States, he has a right to free speech. So he can say what he thinks, but he realizes that what he says will have ramifications. And when he's virtually speaking to the Attorney General through Twitter, there's no question that he's essentially directing the Department of Justice to do his will. So if he were a different kind of person and he couched it differently and said, you know, in no way do I mean to interfere or tell the Department of Justice what to do, but my personal opinion is X, Y, Z, that might be one thing. But that's not the way he phrased it. He attacked the judge. He attacked the entire prosecution. He virtually directed Barr to look into it. And, you know, Barr is now starting an investigation into the Flynn conviction. So I think the way he communicates through Twitter to the Department of Justice makes it not okay. But I have to accept what you say, too. He certainly has the right to express his opinion, but it's how you do it.
And this obviously isn't the only Bill Barr controversy. Out of all the controversies involving Bill Barr over the last, say, 12 months, which do you think was the most overhyped and which do you think was the biggest genuine worry?
Well, I think the biggest genuine worry was the way he handled the rollout of the Mueller report. I thought that was a true disgrace to have summarized it as a complete exoneration when he knew better. And he also knew that the rest of us were not going to get to read it for 3 weeks. Even congressional people weren't going to read it for a week or two. It was really, to me, outrageous because it was an effort to shape public opinion in advance of the release of the report. And it was very successful. Frankly, I think the public never understood Mueller's conclusions. A little bit Mueller's fault, but certainly Barr's fault for the way he handled the rollout. So I think that was the one that really was of gravest concern. In terms of what was overhyped, maybe, you know, he appointed this special prosecutor to look into McCabe and to look into Comey and all of that. And the media was up in arms because they thought he would indict the two of them. Maybe that was the one that was overhyped. I don't know the results of that investigation or if it's still ongoing, actually.
Finally, Judge, what do you think when the history of this period is written? I imagine a lot is going to be said about Trump's impact on the power of the presidency and the power of Congress as well. But what about his impact on the courts?
Well, there's no better question that I would like to answer than that. So it all depends if this is a one-term president or a two-term president. He has already appointed 1/4 of the appellate federal judges throughout the country. As you know, he's had 2 Supreme Court seats to fill, and if he ever were to get a third, then the court would be conservative and right-wing for the rest of my life and for a long time thereafter. So the district courts, not so much, but that depends state by state. There have been some district court appointees who are truly ideologues and unqualified for the position and are not people who should be on the federal bench. But some district court appointments, particularly in New York, I think have been very good. So the real impact is at the appellate level, which is what counts. So when the cases actually get to the Supreme Court, and of course, as you know, very few get to the Supreme Court, but when they do, they have been going in Trump's favor. So, for example, the Supreme Court eventually upheld his travel ban despite all the lower courts having knocked it out. The Supreme Court also overruled 2 voting rights decisions. I think one was in Texas. I'm not sure of the location of the other, but all of these decisions are 5-4, and they've gone in Trump's favor. The only one that didn't go in his favor was the citizenship question on the census. But many other cases that get to the Supreme Court are a loser there. And as the appellate court makeup shifts, I think district court decisions are going to be reversed with unusual frequency by the very conservative, very ideologically committed appellate courts. Now, this term, we have a case pending on abortion rights, and I think there's a danger even now with this case. It's called G-E-E, and it's a real close call. What's going to happen there? I know that this administration would like to roll back Roe versus Wade. It's one of their priorities, and they might yet achieve it.
Judge Shira Shindon, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you.
And with that, we are right out of time for a Fireside Chat. But if you missed Wednesday night's Planet America, you'll find it on iView now. Make it a double feature when too much Planet America is not nearly enough.
Use some popcorn.
Yeah.
Also, if you want to hear about something other than the debate, well, a lot of things happened this week. We'll be discussing them, me and Dr. David Smith, on the Facebook Extra. See it on our Facebook page there.
Good night.
Bye-bye.